Welcome to Be Provided Conservation Radio, sharing stories and information about the environment, wildlife, and the people who are dedicating their lives to protect the world for future generations. These inspirational stories will take you from the Santa Cruz Mountains to remote areas of Africa. Here are your hosts.
Hello everyone, welcome to Be Provided Conservation Radio. Today my guest is Suzi Eszterhas. She wears many hats these days. She's a wildlife photographer. She's also a photo tour leader, an author of some wonderful children's books, and an educator with her project, Girls Who Click. So I'm really excited to hear about all the fun adventures she's been having and hear her story. So welcome to the show, Suzi. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Marcia.
Yeah, I'm very excited to have you here. You have so much going on, and I just love hearing about what you're up to. So, you're a young woman, and you've been doing a lot of things. So how did this all start for you? This trajectory of your life that you're involved with right now. Do you have any specific stories on how this actually started with you?
Yeah, I've always been, as a kid, I was really passionate about wildlife and wildlife photography. So I was one of those kids that always knew exactly what I wanted to do. So as long as I can remember, being a wildlife photographer has been my dream. And the wildlife has always been the main passion more than the photography itself. Is just, everything in my life is wildlife and nature oriented. And it's sort of, I think I was just born that way, always gravitating to animals, not just wild animals, domestic animals as well. Mm-hmm. And then in college, I had an environmental studies degree. There are no degrees in wildlife photography. So I had an environmental studies degree, and I also had what's essentially sort of like a fine art minor. And then after college, I worked a day job. And this job is very competitive. Wildlife photography as a career is not something you can just sort of graduate from college and say, I'm going to be a wildlife photographer. It's sort of like saying you want to be an actor or a musician. You have to have a day job and really sort of, build your portfolio and work your way into it. So I worked a day job, full-time day job for many years, for 6 years. And then on the side, on my days off, I did my photography. So I was essentially a workaholic I think I was a workaholic probably up until about, 5 years ago, actually.
I still think you're a workaholic. I think you still are doing a lot.
Well,
it's fun.
I've done better with my work-life balance recently, but
awesome.
But yeah, and I think one of my big breaks came when I was in my mid to late 20s, and I had an opportunity to go to Africa, and I took it, and I just sort of radically changed my life overnight. I moved to Kenya. I actually went thinking I'd stay a couple months and wound up staying close to 3 years. And when I left, I quit the day job and took all the money out of my savings account, put everything in storage, broke up with this boyfriend that I shouldn't have been with anyway, and radically changed my life, and then wound up living in a tent in Africa and stayed there for about 3 years.
Oh my gosh.
And so that just sort of catapulted things for me in terms of, having so much time in the field to work on various different subjects. And then after that stint, I continued to travel. At one point I was traveling 10 months a year, and now I've reduced that so that I can have a happy home life as well. But I'm still, traveling a lot. So I think you could say that stint in Africa was kind of my big break, and then I sort of started working worldwide after that.
That's amazing. So this opportunity, how did it present yourself to just pick up and go to Kenya? Was it a project that you applied for grant-wise, or
no? It was a project that I sort of carved out for myself.
Oh,
so
nice.
I in college, I had worked with these incredible, I had these mentors that I just, almost every day I have thoughts of gratitude for them, just in terms of everything they've done in my life. These BBC filmmaking team, husband and wife, Owen Newman and Amanda Barrett, when I was young, took me on as sort of like an informal kind of apprentice, where they allowed me to work with them in the field, unpaid, and assist and learn. And that was in college in Tanzania, a few different times, and I learned a lot about living in the bush and being independent and on your own in the bush, and also working with wildlife as well. And then while I was there, I sort of carved out this dream project of mine, which would be to work with cheetah cubs. And so I started carving out this project, and then received a note that there were cheetah cubs around, and everything was sort of lined up for me in terms of the stars being aligned. And I had actually just recently, prior to that, met Lori Marker, who is the world's leading expert on cheetahs, and runs the Cheetah Conservation Fund, and had told her about my project that I was planning, and she said, "Well, I'd love to work with you. Let's, I basically stalked her at an event. She was somebody that I just had great admiration for.
Yeah.
And she, to her credit, she believed in what I wanted to do. I was just this young girl who was like, yeah, I'm going to go to Africa and hang out with cheetah cubs. And she said, well, I'd love to work with you on that. And she believed in what I wanted to do, which, shocked me that someone of her caliber would believe in my little project. And we teamed up, and we actually wound up, the story wound up running in Smithsonian Magazine, and that was so successful, we decided to do a book together after that. So it was that cheetah cub project that initially brought me to Africa, and I worked on cheetahs, I would say, for nearly a year and a half, and then I moved on to other subjects like lions and hyenas and jackals and things like that. So, yeah.
That's amazing. I think we've all been guilty of stalking Lori Marker at some point to get her information.
Yeah, exactly.
But I do. I did want to ask you a little bit more about the future of cheetahs, the book that you wrote with her. But before going, I think it's always interesting for people to hear, like, you picked up, I heard your story at some talks through some Cheetah Conservation Fund events, and you were like alone, like camping out in the Masai Mara with like all these wild animals. Is that correct? And how was that?
Well, I had a guy in camp with me.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I did, yeah. And he was, really what he was there for was security, because security is an issue for a woman alone in Kenya. Many parts of Africa it's not, but in Kenya it is. And so I sort of realized I needed someone in camp. But yeah, for the most part, it was just me and him. But I was out on my own all day, driving myself around. And again, I had that time with the BBC film crew of not just learning how to do that, but also building the confidence to do that. Mm-hmm. So I really was not frightened. People say, well, weren't you scared driving around and stuff? Like, yeah, I got lost a few times and, spent the night out in the car and, had various mishaps, and, people laughed at me a lot because I was, this crazy girl driving around by myself. But I was not scared. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I was wildly passionate about what I was doing. And yeah, I think there were probably some moments where I was a bit reckless, particularly when I just started and just kind of showed up and had to carve out a little life for myself there. But yeah, it was a wild adventure, and I really was just following my dreams. And I think that's kind of been like one of the things about my life that my parents taught me is to follow your dreams. And I, I'm very persistent, and maybe to a fault at times. But that's certainly what helped me find success in this career is being persistent, and I'm not shy about talking about my beginnings were rough, having that day job and, working, 80-hour weeks, was really hard, for many, many years. And then also accruing, $50,000 of credit card debt that took me 12 years to pay off, to buy all the gear to get started. It's, this career requires dedication for sure on many different levels.
Yeah, it does. And it's not, these destinations aren't cheap. They're expensive to get to. And yeah, your equipment alone for cameras and
Yeah.
all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just, when you were talking, it just made me think when you mentioned, support of your parents. I met your mother at one of the Cheetah Conservation Fund events. And
Yeah.
I think she was telling me she gave you like a little point and shoot camera when you were little,
Yeah.
and that you were always taking pictures as a young girl. I thought that was great. So this has always been
Yeah.
part of who you are and what you do. So
Yeah. I
yeah.
mean, I was the dorky kid that was like obsessed with birds and squirrels in my backyard, and then I would photograph my, domestic cats in some, somewhat wild setting in my backyard and tell my parents it was a lion in Africa or a tiger in India, and really it was Ricky, our cat. So, so yeah, I was a piece of work as a kid.
I love it. I love it. I think it's great. So Back to the Future of Cheetahs, that's a beautiful book, and that's how I was first introduced to your work as well, at the events with Dr. Lori Marker at the Wildlife Conservation Network Expo events, and just fell in love with the photos in there and the stories that you guys created, and it kind of brings to life the cheetah. Was that your first big book project then as a wildlife photographer?
Yeah, that
Okay.
was my first coffee table book. I had
Yeah.
done children's books prior to that, but
Oh, I didn't know that.
yeah, that was my first coffee table book because, to be honest, that book was a 10-year long project in terms of the photos. And then Lori, is an incredibly busy person.
Mm.
So in terms of, getting it off the ground and writing the book and into the published date, it was about 10 years. So
Wow. Yeah.
uh-huh. It was our baby. It was a passion project, that book. And then of course it's raised a huge amount of money for cheetah conservation, which I'm really proud of.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a beautiful book. You can tell there was a lot of love and dedication put into that for sure.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll definitely post links to all your books and information too in the show notes so listeners can take a look at that.
Great. Thank
So
you.
yeah, and so your photographs, you can really you've just got a great eye for showing like the behavior of animals and how much you love these animals, and especially baby animals. And I believe you're the expert on some of these baby animal uh, photography, or photographs. I think you've kind of carved a little niche for yourself in that. Is that
Yeah.
correct to say? Yeah.
Well, I'm a specialist
Yeah.
in baby animals in the wild, and I'm not sure there is another one. I'm probably the only person out there in the industry that's obsessed with baby animals in the wild. But yeah, family life stories are what I'm most passionate about.
Okay.
Documenting of various different species, but particularly cat species are one of my favorites to work with, but also some other sort of less sexy, charismatic animals like sloths and you know jackals and things, animals that aren't necessarily always in the public eye.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, and I didn't realize you had children's books before. So has this always been part of your, before the future of cheetahs, has this always been part of your interest then with the family behavior then? And
Yes,
yeah, and
definitely.
focus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's always been my focus. And before I worked on cheetahs, I did a lot of work with brown bear families and then also sea otters, lots of different projects before I ever had the opportunity to do the Cheetah Cub project. And those, the children's books are a natural fit for my work. I do a lot with Ranger Rick magazine and Nat Geo Kids, among
Mm.
also with adult magazines as well. But in particular, children's magazines are a real nice fit for baby animals because children love, as everybody knows, they love baby animals, and that's because they can relate to them so well. And so, having done so many stories for Ranger Rick, it was a natural segue into children's book publishing. So it's been, I've been very lucky to have some really supportive publishers that I work with that are, incredibly supportive of me telling these family life stories in the way that I want to, and I always want my books to be educational. I want them to have a conservation message, so that kids are getting valuable information as well as the photos. So I've always written my children's books as well.
Interesting. How many children's books do you have out right now?
Um, I've published, I think, close to 15.
Wow.
Some
Great.
of them are out of print. There are several still, I think. I have in the bookstores right now, I think there's probably about 5 available.
Oh, that's
Maybe
great.
more, actually. I think maybe it might be more like 7.
That's wonderful. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I know that you have some news to tell of some notoriety or awards you've just received with some of your books. Can you tell us a little bit more about those?
Oh, yeah. So
Yeah.
so I've been quite fortunate in that the my one of my latest books, Moto and Me, has been nominated for some state awards. Most recently, the Children's Literary Association of Utah, I believe, and it's
Mhm.
their Beehive Award. And then I've also been fortunate that the Junior Library Guild has selected several of my titles, which is quite an honor in the children's book publishing industry. So, but Moto and Me in particular has been really well received, and that book was actually the easiest book for me to write because it was my personal story, and it's about me bringing up a serval cat. Um, and about 8 months of my life was spent raising this serval kitten, and then he returned to the wild, and it was a very one of the most profound experiences of my life. And so writing it, it was, the words just float off the page. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. When you're writing a story like that, that's so personal to you, it's very easy. And I absolutely loved writing that, and it's been very well received by kids, which is great.
Ah, wonderful. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
hoping you would mention that. It is a great story, and yeah, I bet a serval was a handful.
Yeah, he was a handful. I mean, in the beginning, he was pretty easy. I kept him in a little pouch I had like a kangaroo pouch that I kept him in, so he could stay with me all day it was when I was in the Mara and I was driving around in my little Jeep, and I was actually photographing hyenas at the time, and I kept him in the little pouch, while I was doing my field work. And then when he got bigger and too big for the pouch and he had really successfully bonded with me, I started leaving him at camp. And I mean, by the time he left, he was, he weighed 40 pounds and
Oh
he
my
was
gosh.
quite big, and could be quite aggressive in his play when he tried to play with me. So it was definitely time for him to return to the wild because he was a major handful by then.
Oh, I bet. I bet. Yeah, I have a Savannah cat, and that's a handful enough
Oh,
sometimes.
yeah.
But
Yeah, definitely.
so, so anyways, so good. And just to keep on track here with time and everything, I think what you're doing is just wonderful, and you're traveling as this photo tour leader as well, and
Yeah.
taking groups out to different locations. And I was hoping you could talk a little bit about how you got involved with that and what those trips entail. Um,
Yeah, I love my photo tours.
mhm.
I do 3 a year, so I don't do too many of them. And they're small group tours. And they're for people who want to do wildlife photography, mostly for fun. I take out amateurs and people who either want to learn, they might be beginners, and they want some instruction and one-on-one guidance, which I give them, or it's for people who know a lot about wildlife photography already and have all the gear, know how to use it, but they know that I'll take them to the right places at the right time for the best photos. And it's a big it's a huge part of my job in terms of it gives me some camaraderie. A lot of the work that I do in the field is quite isolating, and I do
Mhm.
a lot of these projects alone. And so for me, the photo tours are really fun because I get to hang out with people who are really passionate about wildlife and wildlife photography, and we have a lot of fun together. And I can share these experiences with people that I would normally have alone. So I really enjoy my photo tours. They're a lot of work, but I absolutely love doing them. And I only do 3 a year because I have to have time for my other projects, like my magazine stories and stuff like that. But yeah, the photo tours are fun. And then the other thing that's nice is I do different destinations every year. So I always have different offerings. So that's always very interesting as well. This year I'm offering, I did Uganda and Rwanda for chimps and gorillas in February, and then I have Brazil coming up for the Amazon, and then after that I have Norway for polar bears. Nice. So there's a lot of variety in terms of what I offer.
Yeah, so can people find out about this by just going to your website? Is it all available? Okay, great.
Yes, on my website there's tour information, and then my tours tend to fill up pretty fast. So if people are interested, the best thing to do would be to sign up to my mailing list, and then you get tour announcements as tours are announced.
Oh, good advice. Yeah, and this reminded me. I also, when we were talking about the children's books and stuff, I also wanted to mention or talk a little bit about that. You're a person that travels to these destinations, like. When baby animals are being born, right? You're kind of the on-call person. Is that the right way to say it? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I am often on call for various different animals to be born. There's some animals that are seasonal and have their babies, ring-tailed lemurs are a great example. They have their babies in a 1-month period in, I believe it's September, if I remember correctly, in Madagascar. But there are other animals that are trickier and have their babies year round, and it's very difficult to schedule when you would be able to photograph small babies of certain species. So I wind up being on call for many projects.
Wow.
And so for some of these big projects, I can be on call for sometimes 1 or 2 years, waiting because it's not usually just about the species. It's about particular females that I might be targeting that are very relaxed with people, or maybe researchers that are working with particular females that give me information about their pregnancy status. So yes, I wind up being on call, which is quite funny, and it can cause some wrenches in my life in terms of basically anything that I plan, except for tours. Tours I never ever cancel, but other than that, anything I plan, if I'm really deep into an on-call project, it'll always be approached with, well, unless I get called to X to do X, I'll commit to your event.
Oh, interesting. So yeah, I was going to ask you. I'm glad you talked about that. So you pretty much drop. Unless you're on tour, pretty much have to be like, okay, yep, I'm off to wherever, Madagascar or somewhere.
Yeah, I have to drop everything, and usually I try to get on a plane within 3 days, depending on the information that I get. But yeah, it can be 3 days later I'm on a plane.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you kind of pick out who it sounds like the mother and the female is, and let the researchers know that you're interested in documenting this birth or these cubs. Or,
if there's researchers working with the species, and if not, then I have to kind of make my own leads. But yeah, that's kind of the beauty of being freelance. I work freelance, and I actually rarely ever work on assignment. Most of what I do is on spec, which means that I choose the project, I fund the project, and try to sell the story later. And it gives me a huge amount of freedom for my creative vision in terms of what I want to do, and calling the shots on what I'm going to work with in my life. Now, of course, it's not as simple as that. On a regular full-time basis, sometimes I have to put projects on the back burner or say no to projects because they certain animals are more saleable than others. And so, but I firmly believe that every photographer needs to have one passion project a year, which is something that they do regardless of whether or not they're ever going to get a penny back. I think that it's, in our career where, you literally can start seeing animals with dollar signs on their heads. I
Mm-hmm.
spent 5 months of my life working on jackals and then discovered that the rest of the world really doesn't like jackals as much as I do. And the stories didn't get published as widely as I thought they would. So you realize that certain animals are more saleable than others. And one way you can get really burned out is by working on the subjects that are the most saleable and not following your heart in terms of what you want to do. So I think, yes, you have to be smart because it's a business like any other business, but I do believe that there should be one sort of, whatever you want to call it, passion project, art project, but something that you're going to do, you're going to work on that year, regardless of whether or not it's going to pay off at all. And that has kept me going. And that is something that I always make sure I'm doing.
Yeah, good advice. I think that, yeah, it or else it's too much like, I guess, like a job,
Yes,
so yeah, and
exactly.
it gets too tedious. So,
Yes.
so where have you been recently can you talk about any place that you've been, whether it's for babies or doing a fun project
Yeah, I
like your
just got
passion
back
project?
from, yeah, I got back from Guyana.
Ooh.
And I went with my friend Rebecca Cliff, who is a sloth researcher. And she and I decided that we would go to Guyana to try and photograph the pale-throated three-toed sloth,
Oh,
which
cool.
actually there aren't that many professional quality photos that exist of that species. And so it took us a while to kind of figure out which country we'd have our best chances in. And we went to a place which is, strangely enough, called Sloth Island
Ah.
in Guyana.
Uh-huh.
And Sloth Island did not disappoint. We found 13 pale-throated sloths while we were there,
Wow.
with the help of a man named Claude, who is a local indigenous person who is absolutely a sloth whisperer. Not only was he a joy to work with, but he absolutely could find the smallest patch of fur of a sloth hidden in deep, deep vegetation in a tree. He was incredible at finding them for us. So we actually wound up we didn't think we would get lucky enough to have a mother and a baby, but we did wind up finding a mom and baby pair who blessed us with a viewing of their activity almost every afternoon.
Oh,
One of the things
terrific.
Becky has discovered about sloths is that they have particular patterns that they follow. So after about 2 days, we figured out this mother feeds every day between 1 and 5. And so we literally saw her every day between 1 and 5, which was really amazing. But that was a fantastic, I'd never been to Guyana before. Guyana was a great country to be in, very underdeveloped for tourism. So in many ways, I think it's the way Costa Rica was 40 years ago
Oh,
before it became so developed.
yeah. Hmm.
A very wild place with a lot of wildlife. And these sloths were absolutely, they're one of the cutest sloth species. They have sort of yellow moon faces. So they're
Oh,
incredibly photogenic.
that's great. I was thinking that sloths must be difficult to photograph because they're up in the foliage and, it's got to be, you must have a lot of patience, but it's good that you knew the time that she would come and feed and wait.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it takes a huge amount of patience for, there were some days where, we would watch a sloth sleeping. We didn't work with that mom and baby every day. And there were some days where we'd work with different sloths and we'd watch them sleeping for literally sunrise to sunset. The sloth never moved. So it's difficult in terms of, it can be very tedious and
Yeah.
very slow.
Yeah.
But then, you get these, you might get an hour of action that makes it all worthwhile the following day. But yeah, it's hard. I think the biggest thing about sloth watching is the inactivity. And you wind up, what we usually do is just lay on the forest floor. In this case, there was actually a boardwalk because it was a mangrove forest that flooded. But often when we're working with sloths, we just lay like a garbage bag down and we just lay down and watch them with binoculars because it's actually easier on your neck than standing there staring
Uh,
straight up.
Yeah.
12 hours. So we just lay down and watch them and hope they'll move. And sometimes it can be watching a patch of their fur and not even seeing their whole body
I
for
bet. I
12
bet.
hours. So yeah, it's a little tedious.
It is, yeah. Oh, it reminds me. I think you posted on social media, or maybe Rebecca did, about a picture of one of you sleeping. You get a selfie of you two laying down, just
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
patiently waiting.
Yeah. Becky loved that. She loved it because she was wide awake and she got a photo of me sleeping next to her all wide awake.
Oh, that's right. It was usually, yeah, that's funny. I thought that was great. So
Yeah.
it just puts it into perspective. It's not all like you're going out and getting a shot and it's instantaneous. It's you
Oh.
gotta wait and
I think people
yeah,
expect
yeah,
these, they expect nature sometimes to be like wildlife documentaries where
yeah.
it's all action, and it's killing or cuteness all the time. And what they don't realize is that, these animals are inactive for huge amounts of time. You
Mhm.
work with lions and they can sleep 21 hours a day.
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't find your animal for weeks at a time, or maybe your animal's really shy and it spends 2 weeks and you spend 2 weeks getting him used to your presence. So there's a lot of real slow time being a wildlife photographer, but that slow time, even though it can be tedious, it's also incredibly zen because you have nothing else to do but sit there and be very present. And it's a time that I always connect with nature, and you have nothing else to do but sit there and listen to the birds and feel the breeze, and it's very peaceful.
Oh, I can imagine. It sounds nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Instead of just waiting impatiently, just take time to enjoy and absorb it all in. So,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, good. Well, I want to talk, before we lose time, a little bit of your new, I guess I call it a project, but you created a nonprofit called Girls Who Click, which I think
Yes.
is wonderful. And how did this start, and what is Girls Who Click to our listeners, so they know?
So, Girls Who Click is a nonprofit that is aimed at empowering young women in the field of nature photography. So, nature photography is male dominated as a profession and has always been. It's changing a little bit.
Hmm.
There are more and more women getting into it, but still it's incredibly male dominated. So there are obvious frustrations that come with that in my career in being one of the few full-time professional nature photographers. It's very strange. We find there's a lot of amateurs that are women, but not many pros.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Is this because of traveling issues or
there's a lot of
money?
different
Okay.
factors. We looked at a lot of different
Yeah.
things. Travel was certainly one of them, but you don't need to travel to be a full-time professional nature photographer. There's a lot of photographers that make their living photographing regional animals and specializing in their region.
Mm.
And so, or for example, there are insect photographers that only photograph insects, and you can do that in your backyard. So there's a multitude of factors. It can be travel, it can be safety. We also looked at the fact that a lot of the camera gear is marketed towards men. If you look at the ads, they're all aimed at men for the most part. There's a lot of different reasons why there are so few. There's a blog post about it actually on the Girls Who Click website that's quite interesting,
Oh,
that
good.
where we discuss what we found and for the reasons why.
Oh,
But
good.
so I would quite like to change that. And one of the things that I did prior to founding Girls Who Click is I did two free wildlife photography workshops for teen girls down in Monterey. And I wanted to just do a small thing that I could to encourage girls to get into this, and give them some confidence that they could, if they're interested in this, that they can make a career out of it, and that. Or maybe use it. There's the idea of you being a professional nature photographer, but also there's the idea of using nature photography in other careers, maybe careers in conservation where
Hmm.
nature photography is a huge part of it, or being a biologist and nature photography can be a huge part of that. Park
Sure.
ranger, educator. There's a lot of different ways girls could use nature photography in life. And so I was absolutely expecting the girls to be inspired But what I wasn't expecting is for me to be so inspired by these girls. And my heart was just so full after doing those 2 workshops. And so I decided that I wanted to do something bigger and make it a bigger part of my life. So I had some colleagues, some female colleagues, reach out to me when I ran those workshops and said, hey, if there's anything I could ever do, I think what you're doing is great. And so what I decided to do was to expand this effort into a national campaign and bring in my colleagues and make a nonprofit out of it. So basically what we do is we do exactly what I did in Monterey, but we do it throughout the country now with a bunch of different instructors that are the top leading professional women nature photographers in the country.
Wow.
And so we have, a free wildlife photography workshop. We just had one with Jamie Heimbach up in Oregon. There's one coming up next month, I believe, or it might be this month actually, in Washington, D.C. with a woman named Katie Schuler. So we've got programs scheduled throughout the year, all with that focus of bringing young women into this field.
Oh, what a great project. So what is the age range? It sounds like a lot of teens, but do you work with young adults and children as well?
It's 13 to 18.
Oh, okay.
So it's specifically, we targeted that age range because that's when girls are really making decisions about what they want to do in life.
Mm-hmm.
And what they might major in college that could affect their decision. And so we do that. And then in addition to the workshops, we also have a second phase that we're in the process of getting set up right now, which is the girls, after they do these workshops, can donate their top 2 or 3 images from the workshop. And then on the Girls Who Click website, we will be selling those images as prints to raise money for conservation. And that is to just teach these girls that they can make a difference with these photos and that it's not just about collecting pretty pictures, but it's about doing something worthwhile with them. Because as you know, I do a lot for conservation with my work, with raising money through my tours and my books and my prints. And that these girls can do the same.
Oh, that makes me smile. That's great.
Yeah.
And what a great opportunity. And and on your website, you mentioned you have all these women photographer collaborators, if I can say that correct. So you all work together to create these different workshops in different areas. Are you part of each one, or you just kind of let them go off?
I'm the executive director of Girls Who Click, and I run my annual workshop. And I have someone who is working as the chief operating officer for Girls Who Click, Michelle Stern, who's an amazing person, and she works with the photographers and helping them set up their workshops. But really, these workshops are their visions, and they lead them. So it's basically duplicating, the idea of what I did down in Monterey in all these different places in the United States. And right now we're restricted to the United States, mostly just because of funding. But we're hoping that, in future years we can make this a global effort, certainly at least expand into Europe and Canada.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah. It'd be fun to see even people in the African countries. I could see eventually, learning how to do that.
And every workshop requires a huge amount of planning and administrative work. And then also we have 2 low-income spaces where we have the gear that's sponsored for the girls. And so we really rely on donations of individuals to keep these workshops running.
Terrific. Well, I will definitely post this information as well so people can find out more about it. How many? You're welcome. How many girls have gone through the program? Do you have an idea yet?
We're just starting. Yeah. Got the 2 that I led in Monterey, and then we have Jamie so far. So that would probably be around 60, 70 girls.
Oh, that's good.
So each workshop, it depends on the location. But my girls, we had a group of 16 in each one. And then I think Jamie's was around 10 or 12. So it really depends on the location in terms of what the workshop is and whether I can handle a group as large as 16 or if it needs to be a smaller group, because of the schedule for the day.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
What fun. That's
Yeah,
great.
it's fun. It's really inspiring because these girls, seeing the girls like get out there and one of the things that's so nice about having it be all women is that the girls, these are the teen years can be very difficult,
Hmm.
and you see, the first hour or so the girls are kind of quiet, and then after that, particularly with no boys around, they just drop any sort of self consciousness that they came into the workshop with, and they are smiling and having fun, and no longer really trying to be cool. It's just more about what they're interested in, and what they're passionate about, and you see them just so delighted and so inspired. And then when you tell girls, like, this doesn't have to be a dream and you can actually do this,
Hmm.
it's fantastic just seeing how excited they get.
Oh yeah, see them blossom into that. Yeah. No wonder your heart was full after those. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah,
Good. Well,
yeah,
yeah, we really appreciate what you're doing. Um, my last big loaded question for
yeah.
you is,
Okay, I'm ready.
all right, I ask this to of everyone,
Okay.
because I'm trying to share positive stories. But what gives you hope? And all, from all the work you've been doing and all that you've seen, what gives you hope?
Um, I think the human heart, and I I choose to see light and love everywhere, and it's a difficult choice at times, because there's so much hopelessness involved in conservation work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's a choice I make, and I struggle to make it daily, but I do make it daily. I tend to look at children for my inspiration and what some of our youth are up to, particularly in this country, in this political climate,
Mm-hmm.
and how much of a difference our young generations are making. Um, and I'm inspired by that. I look at species that we've brought back from the brink, that are doing so well, species like the mountain gorilla in Rwanda. Um, there's a lot of very hopeful, very positive, inspiring stories that come out every day. And I think it's important to look at those at the same time that we look at the harsh reality. But yeah, it's really humans, and their great capacity for compassion and kindness that I keep trying to see all the time.
Well, that's great. And you can tell with what you're doing with the education piece and sharing your children's books. And I think that's going to bring a whole, lot of other generations, younger generations into this love and passion as well. So,
Well, and I think the kids, it sounds like a cliche, but it really is all up to them, and
mm-hmm,
they're the most important part. And I do believe that, conservation sometimes really misses that. And we're sort of in many ways preaching to the choir when we, work with our adult population. Obviously, we need to, for particularly for politics, but, I do believe that so often the children, get left behind, and it's so important for us to work with children in terms of establishing a connection with nature. And everything I do is really centered around connecting with nature, and that, my children's books, my children's stories, my photo tours, they're all about connecting with nature. I have a print business that is aimed at, nursery art, and I believe the power of having a print of a baby animal on the wall when your child is an infant or 2 years old is that can be the beginning of a bridge to connecting with nature. I just think that we have to really try as hard as we can with visuals to do anything we can to get our kids connected and get them back out in the backyard and sit them in the dirt and listen to the birds. Um, and that's what gives me hope for the kids.
wonderful. And yeah, and I see that a lot with the people I talk to. A lot of education with children is coming through more and more, I think. So,
Mm-hmm.
well, thanks, Susie. Thank you for all you do, and I I just look forward to keeping in touch with you and seeing what you're up to and how this all progresses for you. I think it's just amazing.
Thank you for listening to Be Provided Conservation Radio. Links and resources to today's topic are in our show notes on iTunes. We appreciate your dedication and interest in protecting our natural world for future generations. If you like what you heard, please get involved by volunteering, donating, and sharing these podcasts with your friends. It also helps us to inform more people if you take a minute to leave a rating or review on iTunes. Have a great day, and thank you for listening to Be Provided Conservation Radio.